Hi, I'm Teresa Kleen with CBC in Saskatoon. If you are new to This is Saskatchewan, awesome. Welcome. We are so happy to have you. Now, do us a favor and hit the follow button on your favorite podcast app. That way, you will know when a new episode drops. The more followers we have, the more great episodes we get to make. Okay, here's the show.
Hi, I'm Leisha Grabinski. This is Saskatchewan. If you live in a bedroom community, you tend to pay lower property taxes. The trade-off is that there probably isn't a swimming pool in town. Many people commute into the city for swimming lessons, but also art classes, tumble time for toddlers, and strength sessions. The City of Regina voted unanimously in favor of a 50% surcharge on those lessons and classes to out-of-town users. The City of Saskatoon is looking into it too. It's deciding whether or not to follow Regina's lead. So, Warman, Martensville, and Corman Park residents, you could end up paying more one day too. Is this a smart way to raise revenue, or will it alienate people in neighboring communities? Andrew Stevens is a former Regina City Councillor, and he's on the podcast today to provide some analysis into this decision. Hey, Andrew.
Thanks for the invitation.
So what do you make of this? Why do you think the City of Regina made this move?
Well, whether I agree with it or not, I know it's been a long time coming. I think this notion of how do we deal with a couple of issues. One would be, revenue shortfalls. How do we fund quality infrastructure and recreation amenities? And realize that what we offer as a city is also of regional significance. So people from outside of the city, rightfully, and I think to our credit and benefit, want to experience recreation amenities that we have in the city of Regina. I think it's part of a bigger conversation that I remember when I joined council in 2016, which was regional cooperation and what kind of financial and political relationship should exist between the city of Regina, its council, and the neighboring RMs, bedroom communities, and villages. So this is not surprising. It's something we've talked about, and it looks like the current councillor finally pulled the trigger on some of these decisions.
So what do you think? The vote, it was unanimous. Would you have voted in favor of this?
Well, I now have the luxury of not having to, be in that political dynamic. I'd say if I were there, you kind of have no choice, right? Residents are calling you, and sometimes they're frustrated by the fact that they know that people from outside the city who don't pay taxes in the city of Regina are getting the same service levels at the same cost as they are. So that's the political dynamic, and I totally get that. On the other hand, I don't think, and I've seen no evidence to suggest this is really going to make much of a financial difference, right? So we're not going to raise the kind of revenue you need to finance a brand new aquatic facility or even an outdoor field. And it's important to recognize that none of our recreation amenities, from a park to a community center to indoor gyms and so on, none of them break even close. So they're all subsidized with tax revenue. And the thought is, well, if you don't pay taxes, then you should have higher fees. Personally, I don't think it's sending the right message. I would rather that we talked about and brokered different kinds of relationships with neighboring municipalities that didn't force us to ding visitors who come to the city, which we should be happy about, to come to our pools, to come to our gyms, our field houses, and even maybe to play recreation baseball. For me, you're really nickel-and-diming people, and you're not solving the underlying issue. It might look good. You might collect maybe $100,000 in revenue by measure of the data I've seen. So I don't think it really solves any problems. It makes people mad. And then if people decide for whatever reason, well, maybe I'm just not going to come to Regina anymore to do this. Maybe it's too expensive by their measure. I'm just not going to come. Then you're back where you started, which is revenue shortfall and maybe fewer people actually using our amenities. So you're caught in a difficult situation, but I totally get the rationale. I just don't think this is going to solve anything. And if anything, it just causes more problems.
I wondered what people in Lumsden had to say about this. It is a bedroom community outside of Regina. Here's what Mayor Vern Barber had to say.
I think people are disappointed. I certainly understand why the City of Regina would want to do this. I could imagine that city councillors and the mayor under pressure from their residents saying, hey, how come I can't get this spot in swim lessons on Saturday morning, but somebody from Lumsden or Balgonie is in there? And so I understand what the rationale is behind it. I certainly don't think all that much of, when I hear them say, well, this is going to generate a whole bunch of additional revenue. I think that people will either opt not to go or they will look elsewhere. I've had people talking about, well, we can go to Moose Jaw and access facilities there, and we can shop and have lunch in Moose Jaw. So I really don't know, what the overall impact will be.
What advice would you have for Saskatoon? Because they haven't made a decision on this yet. They've asked administration to look into, should they be following Regina's lead? And so if you were to offer that city some advice at this point, what would you say? Should they also charge out-of-town users more for swimming lessons and art classes?
I'd say, just figure out the bottom line. Is it really going to make a substantial difference? So not even close to half of the operating and maintenance revenue that you're needing to upkeep those facilities comes from user fees, right? So it's property taxes. I'd say, have you exhausted other options? So for instance, would it make more sense for those regional communities to levy their own property taxes and then remit on a fair basis to the city, whether it's Saskatoon or Regina, a consistent revenue stream that says, in lieu of us building this infrastructure, we're going to remit an agreed upon rate that services the needs of our mutual communities rather than creating a barrier for people to access it. I want to see the cost of recreation go down for everybody. I think that's where we should go. But that means you have to subsidize it with tax revenue. And I'd say maybe that's the conversation that should be started.
That probably won't go over well in Balgonie, though, would it?
No, and that's the problem. Everybody wants the service, but they don't want to pay for it. And we came to that realization as well with fire. The regional communities wanted access to our fire service, but our firefighters are not piece rate workers. They don't get paid every time there's a fire. They're sitting or they're working or they're training, et cetera, all the time. 24 hours a day, someone is in a fire hall. You can't just have a system in place in which you pay for it when the fire is happening in the rural community and we've dispatched the firefighters from Regina. So we've come to finally a decision that was on my way out. What they were paying us was unsustainable. It wasn't fair for anybody, and we have to go back to the negotiating table. So that's what we have to have a broader conversation about is what's the fair share and in what role do we have as a regional partner? And maybe the easiest decision to make today is we're going to double your rates. And now everybody in those cities, because you pay less in taxes, you're going to pay more in user fees. If that's the most politically expedient thing you need to do today, think about how much is it going to raise. I got a number here that says 20,000 maybe for Regina. It's like, really? That's barely worth the conversation.
And do you think this could end up costing Regina residents and maybe eventually Saskatoon residents more because often they travel to small towns to use things like hockey rinks? And could they end up raising the rental fees for city users?
Exactly. I think this could be like a mutual assured destruction situation where, I'm not a hockey parent, but I have, God bless them, I have some friends, and the distances they travel for tryouts, I don't get it. Hopefully my kids never want to get into hockey, but you're going to Davidson on a Saturday to practice or to play. Well, now if you're from Regina, are you going to get dinged with it? Is that what we want to do as a province where we depend on the cities as hubs to start charging people more just because it's expedient, or we have a real discussion about politically how do we lock each other in and have a fair share agreement? But you're absolutely right. I think there's just going to be something reciprocal, or those communities then start having to consider maybe we'll just build our own recreation amenities, and then they'll have difficult conversations internally. All of a sudden, you're no longer a tax haven because you've realized the cost of building and operating these facilities. And then you're not able to keep the same kind of tax rates you have, and people are going to pay more in the end anyway. So yeah, I think you're spot on. What's the outcome of this, and where do we want to go, and how does this solve a problem?
So what exactly is the underlying issue here?
I think Councillor Mark Burton put it best. I listened to him on CBC during an interview, and he was right. People complain about taxes. that's universal. And they'll complain about taxes in Regina, and they'll make threats like, well, I'm moving to an acreage, or I'm moving to White City or Emerald Park or somewhere outside. And the same conversation is taking place in Saskatoon because I don't want to pay all these property taxes. Well, you pay those property taxes for services, and you move to places and you pay less in property taxes because you have no services or fewer services. So I get the rationale. It's a frustration. I also know that this was kind of a lightning rod issue when it came to the use of the Brant Center for Recreation and Old-Timer Hockey. There was an organization called Young Guns, which is a profit-oriented center for youth hockey engagement. And it had a lot of out-of-town users that were coming to use our facilities, and locals who pay taxes and have for years are feeling frustrated by being edged out of a facility they essentially pay for on a day-to-day basis for folks who might pay for it for a few hours here or there every given day. So I totally understand their rationale. It makes sense. And I think we also have to realize that for a long time, RMs have functioned as tax shelters, and they might be cross-subsidized by industry. If we think of where the Everett Steel Mill is, that cross-subsidizes the residential ratepayers and the farmers who live in that community. And the same thing for small towns that either don't have services or rely on Regina services, like even fire and police for ancillary supports, and they don't have to pay the taxes, and so they're free riders. And so I understand and actually agree with the principle that Councillor Burton and others advanced when they were making this decision.
So is there another way, if you're thinking about how can we cooperate and work well with bedroom communities, are there conversations right now about amalgamation? Like I think of the Greater Toronto area, the Greater Regina area that would welcome Balgonie and White City, and those bedroom communities would pay taxes as part of the city of Regina. Are any of those conversations active right now?
They're weak. I say my condolences to any provincial elected official who dares suggest that there's a problem with the RM structure, and there might be there are more RM reeves and councillors than there might be people in certain communities. So good on you for trying and even having that conversation. That was a big issue when I was a young undergrad, and the NDP was talking about that, and it was an explosive issue then, and it's even going to be more toxic now. At the council table, we always had these conversations about cooperation, and some of the outlying mayors wanted none of it. I think the RM of Sherwood specifically really has us where they want us, which means if you want to expand, you have to deal with us because we actually surround your city for the most part. And I think Saskatoon's got the same issue right now with Corman Park. So we've had those conversations, but I'll be frank, there's really no provincial leadership that forces those neighboring communities to come to the table. Perhaps we have to have a talk about formal regional cooperation bodies. A lot of them are voluntaristic. They're kind of talk shops. I know Councillor Mancinelli, this has been a big issue of his, and he has tried very hard and done a lot of work, and even Sandra Masters when she was mayor, to broker these kind of conversations. There are great examples. So for instance, the Buffalo Pound Water Treatment Facility is a gold standard of how regional cooperation could work. It is a facility that is owned and, actually it's a standalone organization, but you have two principal shareholders, the City of Moose Jaw and the City of Regina, and that facility is basically co-financed by a number of different stakeholders, and it delivers safe drinking water to probably a quarter of the population in southern Saskatchewan. So that's an example of where it can work incredibly well. But when it comes to expansion and negotiating with outlying RMs, we've had so many conversations that involve like one-off trades, swapping land and boundaries. I think it's kind of absurd considering we're all in this together. And I think for the neighboring communities, do you need to build yourself a multi-million-dollar aquatic facility when Regina is doing that? Where do they get the money from? And I think that's where the province has to step up and talk about that formal structure. But yeah, those conversations are probably older than I am and anybody in this room. They're not new. They're politically contentious, but we've seen some inroads. But we also see where there can be some disputes. With the City of Moose Jaw as an example, there's an arbitration mechanism built into our governance and ownership structure of the Buffalo Pound Water Treatment Facilities. There's no reason why we can't have something like that for all sorts of other different services and issues like land and taxes and recreation and sewage facilities and so on.
Swimming lessons?
Swimming lessons. Everybody should be entitled to that. I don't want to disadvantage someone from White City who wants their kids to swim in our pools. I want them to come to Regina. I don't want to create a disincentive. That's a public good, and we're delivering it. Let's talk about how we're financing this fairly and collaboratively.
How difficult is it for cities right now to pay for things, to upkeep their leisure centers, to build new roads, just all of the expenses that come with being a city? How difficult is it to raise the revenue that's needed to do that?
Well, I might just defer you to the really good podcast on Duck Lake. I think it was funny and lighthearted at times. I think it was really interesting. But there's a real tragic theme there, which is they're basically forced to sell their soul / their name and shake hands with whatever devil comes along with a suitcase full of money because, quite frankly, they don't have the financial means to actually keep that city afloat. Right? If you think about the infrastructure time bombs that we're all sitting on, it's not a Regina issue or a Duck Lake issue, but that's how far they've come. And the city of Regina, we had a conversation about that around partnerships and, go back to the archives to figure out how that went. But we're basically having to sell space or sell name rights to private interests because we don't have the money for operations or for capital. It's a serious issue. And it's something that cities from Toronto to Regina and obviously Duck Lake just are wrestling with, and there are no easy solutions. Again, it's a ticking time bomb financially. Never mind building a new aquatic facility. We've seen how those costs have escalated dramatically over the years. It becomes politically divisive, if not fiscally impossible to achieve if we're thinking about the $1 billion or more infrastructure deficit that we have over the next 10, 15, 20 years. We just can't afford it. And we can't do so in the existing mill rate property tax structure. So we have to find other sources of revenue. And this is sadly where the councillors have landed today, which is, well, let's just tax people who don't vote for us, who live out of city and are providing an inconvenience. And that's what we're going to have to look for, is the easiest way to raise a nickel or two when we need hundreds, if not millions of dollars to solve these problems.
And what about the fact that everything is just getting more expensive? So users from out of the city will pay more for their classes, but also anybody within the city who wants to rent a baseball diamond or a football field, it sounds like everything is going up. So what are your thoughts on that and how people are responding to that, the fact that everything is getting more expensive and that some community groups are going to have to pay the price?
I think it's going in the wrong direction. I understand the rationale. Again, I have the luxury of just being, on the armchair commentator about this. But even when I was a councillor, I voted against several increases to user fees for this one central principle. I can't control the cost of food or the cost of a beer. I can't control those expenses in your life or the cost of steel, if you will. But you know what? I can say as an elected official, I want to prioritize public goods in the city. And I want to say, you have less in your pocket because of the cost of food. I want to make sure that if you have nothing but lint in your pocket, you should have access to a world-class aquatic facility. You should have access to a pool in the summer when the heat's skyrocketing. You should have access to the ski trails in our parks. I want to see the opposite trend, which is we should be increasing the subsidies that we have for recreation. Say if you can't afford streaming services or the private recreation facilities, well, you got a home at the Lawson, at the Fieldhouse, at the Sandra Schmirler. So I think that's where we should be going. And I love, Germany has, I think, as a national right, access to free aquatic facilities. And I think Toronto went down that route several years ago where they decided they were going to increase the subsidy to a point where it didn't cost you anything to go into certain aquatic facilities. That's where we should be going. I think we have to figure out how we get there rather than saying we're going to nickel and dime people and making fun stuff and public services more expensive.
Andrew Stevens, so good to talk to you today. Thank you.
Anytime.
So just a note here, Regina does something else different than Saskatoon when it comes to swimming lessons. They stagger their registrations. City dwellers register first, then out-of-town users get their chance, if there are any spots left. In Saskatoon, everyone from the city all the way out to Warman is trying to register on the same day, and it can be impossible to get in. It's been a real headache for Saskatoon's Elaine Akode-Williams. She's on a wait list, hoping her daughter will get into lessons.
My thoughts on that, I believe people out from the outskirts of Saskatoon is also signing up, that's also their right to, for all those activities, right? And I think it's just really frustrating for everybody within the vicinity as well, trying to have those activities or lessons to be accessible for everybody. I think I just want to end up like hoping that the city can take initiative on how to rectify or do a solution for this ongoing wait list, especially for the swimming lessons. I keep trying, I keep checking every week and then every month, and then it's been how many months, and I just get tired of it. So I ended up just giving up and going to try out a different lesson or activity for my kid instead of swimming.
I'm Leisha Grabinski. Thanks for listening. Andrew was kind enough to mention the podcast we did on Duck Lake. It is a couple episodes back in the feed. If you haven't listened yet, you should. The mayor there is considering selling the naming rights of the town. So many communities are short on cash. Cities and towns are trying all sorts of things to raise revenue. What do you think about all of this? We'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email thisisk@cbc.ca. Talk to you again soon.